A morning interrupted. In the small, peaceful town of Meadowville, mornings usually meant quiet streets, gentle greetings, and the scent of fresh coffee wafting from the corner cafe. Mayor Marie Walker, a woman whose presence was as formidable as her reputation, loved her early jogs through the town she had served for nearly a decade. Born and raised here, Marie had built her life around this community and its people, working tirelessly to bridge gaps, dismantle unspoken biases, and bring Meadowville closer to the values it claimed to cherish. This morning, however, felt different. There was a subtle tension in the air, a restlessness she couldn't quite put her finger on. Dismissing it as mere nerves about her upcoming town council meeting, Marie slipped on her running shoes, fastened her favorite green armband, and headed out the door. As she jogged along Main Street, familiar faces waved, and a few passers-by greeted her warmly. She responded with a nod or a smile, her mind already spinning with ideas for the day ahead. A key meeting with the business council was scheduled, and she intended to discuss ways to improve the infrastructure around the town square, a project that would bring more accessibility and vibrancy to the area. But just as she turned down a quieter side street, something unusual happened. The shrill wail of a police siren pierced the calm morning air, and she instinctively slowed her pace, looking around to see what the commotion was about. She was alone on the street, save for a few birds hopping along the sidewalk, pecking at crumbs. The police car pulled up abruptly beside her, its tires screeching as it came to an unexpected halt. Startled, Marie turned, catching sight of a young white officer stepping out of the vehicle. His expression was stern, his gaze intense as he walked toward her. A sense of unease trickled down her spine. "Hey, you there. Stop," the officer called, his voice sharp, slicing through the morning's tranquility. Marie, ever the composed leader, took out her earbuds and raised her hand slightly in a gesture of cooperation, her brows furrowing in confusion. She watched as he approached, hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. She was well accustomed to interactions with law enforcement. After all, she worked closely with the department on a regular basis, but there was something different about this encounter. The officer's stance, his tone, the way he looked at her, it didn't feel like a typical inquiry. There was a chill to his demeanor that seemed to strip her of her identity, her dignity. "Good morning, officer," she said, her voice measured and calm. "Is there a problem?" "You crossed against the light back there," he replied, his tone accusatory, as if the offense had been far more severe than a potential traffic violation. Mary blinked, taken aback. She was certain she hadn't crossed any light. The intersection had been clear, the pedestrian signal in her favor. She knew this town's rules as well as anyone, perhaps better than most. But she decided to remain calm, believing this was merely a misunderstanding. "I believe I had the right of way, officer," she replied, trying to keep her tone even. "But if I misunderstood, I apologize. I'm actually on my way to a meeting, so if—" "I didn't ask for an excuse," he cut her off, his voice growing more severe. "I asked for your ID. Now, hand it over." The demand was sharp, biting through her attempt at de-escalation. Marie felt a familiar knot tightening in her chest, that old feeling that she had tried so hard to forget, but knew all too well. She wasn't just a citizen on her morning run in the officer's eyes. She was something else entirely, a stranger who didn't belong, a body to be controlled rather than a person to be respected. "Officer, I'm Marie Walker. I'm the mayor of Meadowville," she said, her voice still calm but edged with a firmness that matched her position. "If you check your records, you'll see I haven't committed any violations. I'm willing to clear up any misunderstanding. But I assure you, I've broken no laws." A flicker of disbelief and irritation flashed across the officer's face, his brows knitting together in an expression that was equal parts skepticism and hostility. He took a step closer, his voice lowering, as if to punctuate his authority. "Mayor, huh?" he sneered, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Well, I don't care who you think you are. Around here, you still follow the law. Now show me your ID, or I'll be forced to take you in for resisting an officer." A few early risers had begun to gather, drawn by the unfolding scene. Marie could feel their eyes on her, their whispers threading through the air as they watched their mayor stand face to face with an officer whose intentions seemed to grow darker by the moment. Some of them knew her well, others only by name. But one look at their expressions told her they recognized the injustice playing out before them. "I am the law here," he continued coldly, his gaze steady, unyielding, as he gripped his handcuffs. "And right now, you're under arrest." Marie's heart pounded, a surge of anger sparking through her veins. She had worked her entire life to elevate this town, to fight for people who felt unseen, unheard. And here she was, treated as though she was neither a leader nor a citizen but an outsider. She was a person of color in front of a man with a badge, and at that moment, that was all he saw. "Officer, this is unnecessary. I have not resisted you in any way," Marie said, voice unwavering but edged with a strength that dared him to push further. "I am not going anywhere." A voice from the crowd broke through the tension, calling out, "That's the mayor. Man, you can't do this." But Officer Kirkland was unmoved. His world had narrowed to the authority on his chest and the perceived threat before him. He stepped forward, and before Marie could respond, the cold steel of the cuffs snapped around her wrists. The gasps from the crowd echoed down the street, mingling with the growing hum of phone cameras recording every detail. Marie straightened, chin held high, as Officer Kirkland pushed her toward the squad car. She felt the cold metal biting into her wrists, but maintained her dignity, refusing to let him see the humiliation he sought to impose. Her mind raced, filled with the weight of 1,000 silent voices, those who had come before her, who had been dismissed and disregarded by systems built to protect, yet turned against them. She looked out at the crowd, feeling their eyes, their quiet outrage, their support. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt less than, who had been reminded of their place by someone who believed themselves superior. As Officer Kirkland opened the squad car door, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "What do you think you're doing, Kirkland?" The crowd parted, and Officer Daniels, a well-known figure in Meadowville with a reputation for fairness, stepped forward, his expression incredulous as he took in the scene. Kirkland's jaw tightened, his expression shifting. "Just doing my job," she resisted. Daniels took in Marie's face, her calm yet determined gaze, and the tension in the crowd. He turned back to Kirkland, his voice low and firm. "That's the mayor, Kirkland. Take those cuffs off. Now." But Kirkland's grip only tightened, his face a mixture of frustration and defiance. She crossed against the light. "That's grounds for an arrest." Daniel's eyes flicked from Marie to the crowd, reading the tension that had woven itself into the fabric of the moment. He understood what Kirkland didn't see, that this was no ordinary arrest, and that the ripples of this single act would resonate far beyond the streets of Meadowville. Kirkland glared at Daniels, his knuckles white against the handcuffs. The crowd was growing, their murmurs louder, their frustration unmistakable. Marie felt the tide turning, sensing that the truth, once buried, was starting to surface. "You don't have to do this," Marie said softly, meeting Kirkland's gaze. Her words held more weight than a command or plea. They were a challenge to the silent biases that had shaped this moment and to the courage it would take to face them. But Kirkland's grip remained firm, his pride too deeply entangled with his authority. With a final push, he forced Marie into the back seat, unaware that his decision had lit a fuse that would soon set Meadowville ablaze with calls for justice. And as the squad car pulled away, Marie felt a new determination take root within her. This battle was just beginning, and she would not be silent. Standing her ground. The squad car's engine rumbled as it pulled away from the street corner, the police lights flashing over Meadowville's familiar buildings. Marie sat in the back seat, her hands still restrained in the cold cuffs, her body jolted with each turn. Outside, she could see her townspeople standing stunned on the sidewalk, their phones held high, recording every second of what had just transpired. The disbelief in their faces mirrored her own sense of shock. But beneath that, she felt the sharp stab of something deeper: betrayal. In all her years as mayor, Marie had never experienced something quite like this. She had confronted prejudice before, through whispered judgments, through condescending tones, through the subtle dismissals and endless battles for the recognition she knew she deserved. But this was different. This was public, raw, and deeply humiliating, and it struck her in a way that felt painfully personal. As the squad car made its way through town, Marie's mind raced. She couldn't afford to dwell on the humiliation alone. She was a leader, and this moment had quickly spiraled into something much larger than herself. She glanced at Officer Kirkland through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She wondered if he had any idea what he had set in motion. The car finally pulled into the back lot of the Meadowville police station, a modest brick building she had entered countless times for community meetings, training events, and discussions on how to make the town safer for all residents. But this time was different. This time, she was being escorted in as if she were a criminal. The door opened, and Kirkland gripped her arm with a practiced, almost mechanical firmness, guiding her out of the car. She caught sight of a few familiar faces in the parking lot, officers who had worked alongside her, who had seen her dedication and commitment to the community. Some looked away. Others seemed paralyzed by shock, unable to reconcile the sight of their mayor in cuffs with the woman they had come to know and respect. "Move along, folks," Kirkland barked at the onlookers, his tone curt and dismissive. Official business. But as he led her inside, Marie noticed a few of them reaching for their phones, no doubt spreading the word about the absurd scene they had just witnessed. She felt a pang of gratitude for their silent support, but she also knew that support alone would not be enough. Meadowville was about to face a reckoning, and it would require more than quiet solidarity to bring about real change. Inside the station, Kirkland led her down a narrow hallway, the walls lined with faded community bulletins and notices. He finally stopped outside a small interrogation room, its metal door heavy and foreboding. Without a word, he opened it, gesturing for her to enter. Marie walked in, her head held high, her gaze steady. She took a seat on one side of the table, her hands still bound in front of her, feeling the unforgiving press of the metal against her skin. Kirkland closed the door, the silence settling thickly between them. He sat across from her, eyes scanning her face with a cold, almost clinical detachment. "You're in a lot of trouble, Mayor," he said, his tone mocking as he emphasized her title. Marie met his gaze, unflinching. "Officer Kirkland, let's be clear here. You stopped me without cause. You escalated a situation that didn't require it. And now you're bringing me here as if I've committed a serious crime. Why?" Kirkland's expression darkened, his posture stiffening. "You resisted an officer's orders. That's grounds for arrest. And whether you're the mayor or not, the law applies to everyone." Marie's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I never resisted you. I asked for clarification and offered to identify myself. You chose to ignore that. You chose to turn this into something it never had to be." Kirkland leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Funny, isn't it? All these people think they're above the law just because they hold a title, just because they got friends in high places. But at the end of the day, a badge outranks a title." There it was, the simmering resentment, the thinly veiled disdain. Marie had seen this before, though never so blatantly directed at her. She realized that, to Kirkland, her position, her accomplishments, and even her community standing meant nothing. She was just another target, another person he could control to assert his authority. "You're mistaken if you think a badge gives you unchecked power," she said, her tone firm. "You're here to serve this community, not impose your will on it. What you're doing is an abuse of that power." His face reddened, and he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Watch yourself, Mayor. You may have a pretty title, but in here, you're just another person who needs to learn a lesson." A tense silence filled the room, both of them locked in an unspoken battle of wills. Marie felt the weight of every injustice, every prejudice, every unchecked assumption pressing down on her, but she refused to look away, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. At that moment, the door swung open, breaking the tension. Officer Daniels stood in the doorway, his gaze flicking between Kirkland and Marie, his expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "Kirkland," he said, his voice steady but firm, a word outside. Kirkland shot Marie a final glare before standing and exiting the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Left alone, Marie exhaled slowly, her composure frayed but unbroken. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control, to stay calm under pressure, but this was a different kind of pressure, a pressure that reached into her past, into memories she had tried to bury. Outside the room, she could hear the muffled voices of the two officers, their tones tense and sharp. She caught snippets of the conversation through the heavy door. "Out of line, Kirkland. She's the mayor. Doesn't matter. Resisted. Needs to be taught." Daniel's voice grew louder, more insistent. "This is bigger than you realize, Kirkland. You've put the whole department in jeopardy by doing this." A pause followed, then the door opened again, and Daniels re-entered, his face drawn with frustration, but softened by a hint of sympathy. He crossed the room, pulling a chair over to sit across from her, and after a moment, reached over to unlock the cuffs from her wrists. Marie rubbed her wrists, the relief immediate but fleeting. She met Daniel's gaze, appreciating his restraint and integrity, but also sensing his discomfort. She knew he wasn't a stranger to the kind of prejudice she had just endured, but he was in a difficult position himself, bound by loyalty to his fellow officers and the values of the department. "Marie," he began quietly, using her first name as a gesture of trust. "I'm so sorry about this. I had no idea he'd go this far. Kirkland's, he's new here. He doesn't know this town like we do." Marie nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. "I appreciate your intervention, Daniels, but this isn't just about Kirkland. It's about what he represents, something that's been festering here far longer than either of us." Daniels sighed, glancing away before nodding. "I know. I do. But what happened out there today? People are going to talk. It's already spreading. We need to get ahead of this, or it's going to blow up in ways none of us can control." She looked at him, the weight of their shared understanding pressing down on her. "It should blow up, Daniels. People need to see what's happening here, what's been happening quietly for too long." Daniels swallowed, his gaze steady but wary. "Mary, I'm with you. You know I am. But you need to be careful. Not everyone in this town is going to support you in bringing this to light." She straightened, a newfound resolve strengthening her voice. "That's a risk I'm willing to take. If Meadowville is going to be the town we say it is, a town of unity, respect, and justice, then we can't keep ignoring these things." "I won't keep ignoring them." Daniels nodded slowly, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "Then I'll do what I can to help. But just be prepared. This is going to get messy." He stood, offering her a hand, and she took it, feeling the unspoken alliance between them. They walked back out into the main area, where a small crowd had gathered, made up of officers, townspeople who had followed from the street, and even a few reporters who had heard the news. The whispers grew louder as they saw her, some murmuring in shock, others nodding in support. Marie took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd, her mind racing with the realization of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Meadowville and the silent divides that had fractured it for too long. And as she stepped forward, preparing to address the crowd, she knew that this was only the beginning of a fight that would challenge everything Meadowville believed about itself. The storm had been brewing for years, and today it had finally broken. Support from the people. The hum of voices reverberated through the Meadowville police station's lobby as Mayor Marie Walker stepped out of the dim hallway, her wrists aching from the recent grip of the cuffs. She had expected only a few officers lingering in the precinct, but what she saw took her by surprise. The lobby was packed with familiar faces, townspeople, local business owners, and even a few of her childhood friends. News of her arrest had spread through the town like wildfire, and Meadowville's residents had come out in force, outraged and eager for answers. Marie scanned the crowd, taking in the concerned faces. She could see her close friend Grace, standing at the front with her arms crossed and an expression of disbelief etched on her face. Behind her was Mr. Cho, the owner of the town's hardware store, and Mrs. Emerson, who had taught Marie in elementary school and now stood with a protective hand over her chest, as though shielding her heart from the impact of what had happened. The crowd hushed as Marie stepped forward, Officer Daniels beside her. A few murmurs and gasps punctuated the silence as they took in her slightly disheveled appearance, her steady gaze, and the lingering marks on her wrists. She felt their anger and shock, almost palpable in the charged air, and took a deep breath before addressing them. "Thank you all for being here," Marie began, her voice calm yet firm, though her heart pounded with a mix of gratitude and residual anger. "I'm sure many of you have questions. What happened this morning was an unjust and wrongful arrest." She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, each gaze heavy with support, concern, and indignation. This was not the way she had planned to spend her morning, nor did she imagine she'd be standing before her community explaining why she, the mayor, had been handcuffed and hauled into the police station. Grace, unable to contain her frustration, called out from the front of the crowd, "Marie, this is insane. How could they do this to you? This is our town." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder as others echoed her disbelief. Marie raised a hand to calm them. "I know, Grace, and that's exactly why we're here. What happened to me today isn't just about me. It's about the deeper issues that still exist in Meadowville, issues we can no longer ignore." The crowd's faces shifted from outrage to understanding. They knew what she was talking about, the unspoken tension that had long simmered beneath Meadowville's quaint surface. While the town prided itself on unity, there had always been a quiet current of inequality, a feeling that not everyone was truly seen or treated equally. Marie had fought for years to bridge that gap, but this morning's incident was a stark reminder that there was still much work to be done. Just then, the station doors swung open with a clang, and in walked Officer Kirkland, his expression one of annoyance as he was greeted by the sea of eyes fixed intently on him. He paused, clearly taken aback by the gathering. His gaze flickered over the crowd, the realization dawning that his actions had sparked something far larger than he had anticipated. Kirkland straightened, his jaw clenched as he approached the front of the room, brushing past Marie with a faint sneer. "What is this, a rally?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Marie to hear. "Seems a bit overdramatic, don't you think?" Marie felt a wave of anger rise within her, but she kept her expression neutral. This was the moment to stand firm, to show Meadowville what leadership looked like, even in the face of blatant disrespect. She turned to address the crowd again, knowing that each word she spoke was not only for them, but also for Kirkland, who stood defiantly beside her, his arms crossed in dismissal. "Today I was reminded of the power of prejudice," she said, her voice unwavering, "and how easily it can slip into our institutions, our systems, even our small-town community. What happened to me this morning wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger problem. We must address it head-on." A few people in the crowd nodded, their faces resolute. Marie could see the mix of emotions, disbelief, support, but also an underlying fatigue. They were tired of seeing friends, family members, and neighbors treated as if they were less than. Her words seemed to breathe life into their own frustrations, uniting them in a shared purpose. Kirkland, who had been listening with barely concealed disdain, scoffed and turned to address the crowd. "Listen, folks," he said, holding up a hand as though he were making a peace offering. "All I did was enforce the law. Mayor Walker here crossed against the light. She resisted when I asked her to comply. My job is to uphold the rules, plain and simple. She's not above the law, mayor or not. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A collective murmur of disbelief and frustration rose as people shook their heads and whispered heatedly to one another. Marie could see that Kirkland's words were only fanning the flames of their anger. Grace stepped forward, her voice sharp. You call this enforcing the law? She's the mayor, and we all know she wouldn't have done anything wrong. We know Marie, and we know this town. What you did was an abuse of power, plain and simple. Kirkland's face reddened as he tried to maintain his composure. He turned to Daniels, who had been silently observing from the side. Back me up here, Daniels, he said, an edge of desperation creeping into his voice. You know the rules. You know we can't let anyone slide, not even the mayor. Daniels sighed, stepping forward and looking at the crowd before addressing Kirkland. There's a difference between enforcing the law and abusing authority, Kirkland, he said quietly, and today you crossed that line. The law isn't a weapon. It's meant to protect and serve this community. Kirkland scowled, shifting uncomfortably. His confidence seemed to waver, and he glanced back at the crowd, now even more visibly against him. His eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty, as if he were beginning to realize the magnitude of the backlash. Marie took the opportunity to turn back to the crowd. This isn't just about one officer's actions. It's about a culture that allows these actions to go unchecked. It's about ensuring that every resident of Meadowville, regardless of their position, race, or background, is treated with respect and dignity. Applause erupted, and the sound filled the station lobby, a crescendo of support that seemed to rattle even the most hardened officers in the room. Marie felt the warmth of the crowd's solidarity, their commitment to her and to each other. She knew that this moment could be a turning point, a chance for Meadowville to take a hard look at itself and to become a town that truly lived up to its ideals. Kirkland's face twisted in anger, and he threw his hands up, muttering under his breath as he stormed out of the lobby. Daniels watched him go, shaking his head, and then turned back to Marie, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. Mary, Daniels said softly, so only she could hear, you've done something today. You've woken something up in this town. They needed to see this, to see you stand up for them, and for yourself. She nodded, a swell of emotion tightening her throat. I just hope it leads to real change, she replied, glancing at the faces of her supporters, each of them looking back with renewed hope. Outside the station, more residents had gathered, drawn by the news and the rapid spread of videos and photos shared on social media. Marie and Daniels stepped outside together, the crisp morning air meeting them as they looked out over the sea of people who had come to support her, many holding homemade signs and chanting her name. One sign stood out, held by a young girl no older than 12, who had written in bold letters, "Justice for all, not just some." Marie's heart swelled, and she felt her resolve deepen. This moment, this gathering, it was a powerful reminder that change didn't happen in solitude. It took community, resilience, and the courage to stand together against injustices, no matter how small or large. She raised her hands, quieting the crowd. Today marks the beginning of a new Meadowville, she called out, her voice carrying over the gathered crowd. One where we no longer stay silent about the things that divide us. One where we'd hold each other, and ourselves, accountable. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in unison, a testament to their shared purpose. Marie looked out over them, feeling a fierce pride and a deep responsibility. This was more than a moment. This was a movement, and she would do everything in her power to make sure that Meadowville became a town where justice truly meant something for everyone. As she spoke to the crowd, the flickering lights of news cameras and reporters positioned themselves, capturing every word. Marie realized that Meadowville's story was about to reach far beyond its borders, shining a light on the small town's transformation and the courage of a community that had found its voice. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm glow over the assembled crowd, Marie knew that this was just the beginning of a long but necessary journey for Meadowville. The road ahead would be challenging, but together they would forge a path toward a more just and united future. The release and rallying call. The crowd's cheers and chants filled the air outside the Meadowville police station, and Mayor Marie Walker stood at its heart, feeling both the weight and power of the moment. What had begun as a humiliating encounter with Officer Kirkland had transformed into a groundswell of unity and support. As more townsfolk gathered, Marie realized that she was not alone in her frustration. This was a shared reckoning. Officer Daniels stepped forward, tapping her shoulder gently. "Mary, let's talk inside. You've got a lot of people out here supporting you, but I think we need to get an official statement together. The media is here too, and you'll want this on record." Marie nodded, glancing at the throng of reporters who had arrived, some holding microphones, others angling their cameras toward her. Each lens was a portal into homes beyond Meadowville, each microphone a chance to speak not just to her town, but to countless others. She turned to the crowd and raised her hands, asking for quiet. The murmurs and cheers softened to a low hum, and Marie looked over the sea of faces, all united in their determination for justice. "Thank you all for being here," she said, her voice carrying with newfound strength. Today was supposed to be just another morning, just another jog around town. But instead, I experienced something many in our community have felt for years: the sting of prejudice and the misuse of power. This isn't just about me. It's about us. It's about Meadowville and the future we want to create here. I want us to start that journey together today. A roar of approval rose from the crowd, punctuated by applause and calls of support. With a small, appreciative nod, Marie excused herself and followed Officer Daniels back into the police station, where they entered a quiet meeting room away from the crowd's eyes and ears. Inside, a few other officers waited, shifting uncomfortably as she entered. She recognized some of them, men and women she'd worked alongside for years. They had been at her fundraisers, spoken at town hall meetings, and even supported her initiatives to fund police training programs. Seeing them now, eyes averted or shoulders tense, reminded her of the complexity of the moment. These officers weren't her enemies. They were a part of the community too, caught between their loyalty to the force and their growing awareness of the systemic issues Marie was now forced to confront head-on. Officer Daniels gestured for her to take a seat. "Mary, I want you to know that what happened today was beyond unacceptable. Kirkland, well, let's just say he's got issues to work through. We'll be handling this internally, and I assure you, there will be consequences." Marie nodded, feeling the familiar tangle of frustration and exhaustion. "Daniels, this isn't just about one officer's actions. It's about a culture that has allowed biases to flourish unchecked. I know the job you all do is difficult, and I know you're not all like Kirkland, but if Meadowville's going to grow, we have to confront these issues together." Daniels lowered his head, his expression one of guilt and understanding. "I agree. I want to help, but you'll have to prepare yourself, Marie. This isn't just going to be about making a statement or having a few community meetings. It's going to get messy, and a lot of people aren't going to like it." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I've never been one to shy away from the hard work, Daniels. If this is what needs to be done, then let's get started." Just then, the door swung open, and Chief Burrows entered, a tall, broad man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a reputation for being Meadowville's tough but fair police chief. His face, usually set in a stern expression, held a look of deep concern as he approached Marie. "Mayor Walker," he greeted, his voice carrying the weight of formality. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what happened today. This is not the Meadowville Police Department I know, and I will personally see to it that Kirkland faces the consequences of his actions." Marie studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his words. "Chief Burrows, I appreciate your apology, but I hope you understand this isn't just about punishing one officer. I'm talking about a thorough review of our police practices. I want real changes, policies that will prevent this from happening to anyone else." The chief nodded slowly, his brow furrowing. Understood. I'll support whatever steps are necessary to rebuild trust with the community. Let's start with a public statement. I think it would mean a lot coming from you, especially now. Marie stood up, straightening her posture, and took a deep breath. Then let's do it. They exited the room and moved toward the front of the station, where the crowd was still waiting. As they stepped outside, the townspeople erupted in cheers once again, their hope renewed at the sight of Marie and the police chief standing together. Marie raised her hands to quiet them, feeling the full weight of the moment as reporters crowded forward, jostling to capture every word. Today, she began, her voice firm but resonant. We've witnessed something that cannot be ignored. What happened to me could have happened to anyone. It could have happened to someone without a title, without a platform, someone who might not have had a crowd to stand behind them. And that's the problem. She looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze steady, her words measured. This isn't the Meadowville I know, and it's not the Meadowville I want for the next generation. We need accountability, transparency, and above all, respect for every person who calls this town home. That's why, effective immediately, we will be conducting a full review of our police practices with input from community leaders and citizens. I am committed to creating a Meadowville where everyone is treated with dignity, without exception. The crowd responded with a surge of applause, the sound echoing through the square. Chief Burrows nodded in agreement, stepping up to the microphone to add his support. Mayor Walker's right, he said, his voice solemn. As the chief of police, I take full responsibility for ensuring that every officer upholds the values of fairness and respect that this town stands for. We will work tirelessly to make sure that what happened today never happens again to anyone. For a moment, silence fell over the crowd as the words sank in. Then, slowly, they began to clap, a steady rhythm building into an overwhelming show of support and approval. Mary felt a rush of pride as she took in the faces of her townspeople, people who had come to her defense, who had stood by her in this moment of need. She had fought for them for years, but today they had fought for her, and that knowledge filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. As the gathering began to disperse, people coming up to shake her hand or offer a few words of encouragement, Marie spotted a group of young high school students standing to the side, watching her with expressions of admiration and curiosity. One of them, a young black girl with braids and a determined gaze, stepped forward, her hand outstretched. Mayor Walker, I just wanted to say thank you. What you did today, it means a lot to people like me. Marie shook her hand, feeling the warmth of the young girl's grip and the strength in her words. Thank you. It's people like you who give me hope for this town's future. Keep speaking up, keep fighting for what's right. The girl nodded, her eyes shining with determination as she rejoined her friends. Marie turned back to the police station, a deep, resolute calm settling over her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. But today had proven that she wasn't alone in this fight. Meadowville was ready for change, and she would lead them through it. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the square, Marie felt the weight of her position settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a responsibility she was honored to bear. This was her town, her community, and together they would transform Meadowville into a place of unity and respect. The rallying call had been sounded, and Meadowville had answered. A town awakens. The days following Mary Walker's arrest and public statement stirred something profound in Meadowville. News outlets picked up the story, and the video footage taken by townsfolk spread quickly across social media. People everywhere watched in disbelief as the mayor of a small town was unjustly handcuffed by one of her own officers, a scene that felt both surreal and all too familiar. By the time the dust settled, it was clear this was no longer just about Marie's confrontation with Officer Kirkland. It was a reckoning for the entire town. The town hall, typically a quiet building nestled at the end of Main Street, became a hub of activity. People gathered in record numbers, eager to attend community meetings, forums, and workshops. The meetings were raw, filled with emotions that had long simmered under the surface. For many, Marie's arrest had torn the bandage off wounds that had been hidden for far too long. On Monday evening, the town hall was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs were set up in rows that stretched all the way to the back wall, but it wasn't enough. People stood shoulder to shoulder, spilling out into the lobby and even onto the steps outside, where loudspeakers had been set up for those who couldn't find a seat inside. Marie stood at the front of the room, gazing at the crowd with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. She felt the weight of her responsibility to them now more than ever. This was her town, these were her people, and she had a duty to lead them through the conversations that needed to be had. She took a deep breath, letting the room settle before she spoke. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice steady and warm. "I know this past week has been challenging for us all, but I also know that we're here because we care about each other and about our community." As she spoke, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Emerson, her former teacher, sat in the front row, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder as she listened intently. Beside her was Mr. Cho, the hardware store owner, nodding along with a look of firm resolve. Toward the back, Grace stood with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Marie, radiating support. "Many of you have reached out to me with your own stories," Marie continued, her voice softening. "Stories of feeling unseen, of moments when you didn't feel respected or valued. And I want you to know, those stories are not just yours. They're ours. They belong to all of us. And tonight, we're here to make sure that no one in Meadowville ever feels invisible again." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Marie could see the impact of her words in the faces around her. This was a moment of truth, a chance to finally confront the unspoken divides that had lingered in Meadowville for generations. Marie gestured to Chief Burrows, who stood off to the side. He stepped forward, clearing his throat before addressing the crowd. His expression was solemn, his normally imposing figure softened by a look of humility. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "As your police chief, I want to start by saying I'm deeply sorry for what happened last week. Mayor Walker didn't deserve what happened to her, and neither does anyone else in our town." He paused, glancing at Marie, then back at the crowd. "We're going to be making changes, starting immediately. I'm instituting a full review of our department's practices and training protocols. Officer Kirkland's actions were unacceptable, and there will be accountability. But it doesn't stop there. We're also going to begin working with community leaders to create a more transparent and accountable relationship between the police and the people we serve." A round of applause filled the room, mingled with a few supportive cheers. The people of Meadowville wanted to believe him. They wanted to trust that this time, things would truly change. But there were also expressions of skepticism, the subtle frowns and tense shoulders of those who had been disappointed by promises before. From the middle of the room, a young woman with a baby on her hip raised her hand. Marie recognized her. Lena Moore, a single mother who had recently moved back to Meadowville to be closer to her family. Marie gestured for her to speak, and a microphone was passed through the crowd. "Chief Burrows," Lena began, her voice clear and strong. "With all due respect, we've heard promises like this before, but what guarantees do we have that this time it won't just fade away? That this won't just be swept under the rug once the attention dies down?" The crowd held its breath, all eyes on Chief Burrows as he absorbed her question. He seemed to understand the weight of what she was asking. Slowly, he nodded, his expression serious. "You're absolutely right, Ms. Moore," he said, his voice steady. "And that's why we're not going to do this alone. We'll be forming a community oversight committee made up of local residents who will work alongside the police department. This committee will review complaints, oversee disciplinary actions, and ensure transparency in every decision we make. And I want every person in this room to know you'll be able to hold us accountable." A sense of relief seemed to settle over the room, but Lena wasn't done. She stepped forward, cradling her child close. "And what about Officer Kirkland? she asked, her tone sharp. "What happens to him?" Chief Burroughs hesitated, glancing at Marie, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Officer Kirkland has been placed on leave, pending an internal investigation," Burroughs replied carefully. "We take this matter very seriously, and he will be held accountable for his actions. I can assure you of that." The crowd murmured in response, and Marie could sense both relief and frustration in their voices. Accountability was a start, but it wasn't enough to heal the years of hurt that had built up in this town. Marie stepped back to the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We're going to need everyone's involvement to truly make Meadowville the community we all want it to be. I encourage you to sign up to join the Oversight Committee, to participate in town hall meetings, and to share your stories. The only way we'll move forward is if we do it together." A hand shot up in the back of the room, belonging to a young man with a mop of curly hair and a determined look. He stood up, holding his phone in one hand, its screen glowing with the live stream of the meeting. "I want to be part of that committee," he announced, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "I want to make sure that my little brothers and sisters don't have to experience what Mayor Walker went through." The crowd broke into applause, and others began raising their hands, calling out their willingness to help, to participate, to take an active role in shaping Meadowville's future. Marie's heart swelled with pride, seeing her town come together like this, ready to face the hard truths and work for a brighter tomorrow. The meeting continued late into the night, with townsfolk sharing their stories, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. As the last of the crowd finally trickled out, Marie sat on the edge of the stage, feeling both exhausted and deeply fulfilled. She had known this journey wouldn't be easy, but tonight had given her hope that real change was possible. Chief Burroughs approached her, his expression thoughtful. "Mary," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for not letting this go. I know this hasn't been easy for you, but you've sparked something in this town." Marie smiled, looking around the now empty room that had been filled with so much life and passion only moments before. "Thank you, Chief, but this is just the start. There's still so much work to do." He nodded in agreement. "If there's anything I can do to help, you have my support." She extended her hand, and he shook it firmly. They were allies now, bound by a shared commitment to Meadowville and a determination to make things right. As Marie walked out of the town hall that night, the cool air filled her lungs, grounding her in the reality of what lay ahead. The quiet streets of Meadowville were peaceful once again, but she knew that peace had come at a price. This was the beginning of a new chapter for her town, one where they could no longer ignore the divides that had long been swept under the rug. Marie knew that the path forward would be long, with many challenges still to come. But with her community by her side, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Meadowville was no longer asleep. It had awakened, ready to fight for a future built on justice, respect, and unity. And Marie Walker would be there every step of the way, leading them toward the town they all deserved. A new dawn for Meadowville. In the weeks following the tumultuous events surrounding Marie Walker's arrest, Meadowville underwent a profound transformation. The town's spirit, once calm and complacent, now buzzed with a fervent energy as the community grappled with hard truths and charted a new path forward. Every corner of Meadowville seemed touched by change. Residents greeted each other with newfound respect, and once overlooked voices were finally being heard. What had started as an injustice against the mayor had grown into a town-wide reckoning, a long overdue journey toward unity, respect, and transparency. At the heart of this movement was the newly established Community Oversight Committee. Composed of residents from all walks of life, the committee held regular meetings to discuss grievances, provide feedback to the police department, and recommend policies to promote accountability. Chief Burroughs, who had initially seemed hesitant, became an active participant, engaging with residents, answering tough questions, and spearheading reforms within the police department. With Marie's encouragement, he committed to revising training protocols, ensuring officers were educated on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. For many, these changes felt like a revelation, a new chapter in Meadowville's history that allowed people to feel both safe and valued. The committee meetings, which took place every Tuesday evening in the town hall, quickly became a staple of community life, often filling to capacity with residents eager to participate and share their ideas. One evening, Marie attended a packed meeting where the committee was discussing a particularly contentious topic: the inclusion of a youth advisory council to provide young people with a voice in town matters. This idea had been proposed by Lena Moore, the young mother who had questioned Chief Burrows at the town hall. As she stood before the room, baby on her hip and a determined glint in her eye, Lena's words resonated with the crowd. "Our young people deserve to know that they matter," she said, her voice steady. "They need to know that their opinions count, that they're part of this community. If we want to build a better Meadowville, we have to include everyone, especially the next generation." The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding and clapping as Lena finished. Marie felt a surge of pride for the courage and conviction radiating from her town. Lena's proposal passed with overwhelming support, and by the end of the meeting, several teenagers had volunteered to lead the advisory council, eager to make their voices heard. As Marie left the meeting that night, she was approached by a familiar face, Jamal, the young man who had been live streaming her initial statement at the police station. He had been instrumental in spreading the word about her arrest and had quickly become a vocal advocate for change in Meadowville. "Mayor Walker," he said, a note of admiration in his voice, "I just wanted to thank you. I don't think any of us realized how much we needed this, how much we needed to be heard." Marie smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Jamal. You and everyone else here have shown what this town is truly capable of. I'm proud to stand with you." Over the following months, Meadowville continued to evolve. A series of workshops were introduced, focused on community building, conflict resolution, and understanding diversity. These events brought together people who might never have otherwise crossed paths, fostering friendships and connections that deepened the sense of unity within the town. On the policing side, Chief Burrows worked closely with Officer Daniels, who had played a key role in diffusing the situation on the day of Marie's arrest. Daniels became a liaison between the department and the Oversight Committee, acting as a bridge between the police and the people. Through his efforts, officers began joining community events, volunteering in schools, and participating in neighborhood watch programs. The goal was to dismantle the walls of mistrust and foster a sense of collaboration. One Saturday morning, Marie stood at the edge of the town square, watching as a group of officers joined a local youth basketball game. Children laughed and cheered, parents watched with smiles, and officers playfully engaged with the kids, their uniforms blending seamlessly into the gathering. The sight was a testament to how far Meadowville had come, and how far it was still willing to go. The town's transformation caught the attention of neighboring communities, and before long, Meadowville became known as a model of progressive reform. News articles highlighted the way the town had come together in the face of adversity, while other towns reached out to learn from Meadowville's experience, eager to implement similar initiatives. Marie received calls from mayors and civic leaders across the state, all inspired by Meadowville's journey toward unity and respect. In early spring, Marie organized a community celebration day to commemorate the changes they had achieved and to honor the resilience of the town. It was held on the anniversary of the day she'd been arrested, a day that had become a symbol of hope and transformation, rather than one of anger and shame. Town Square was decorated with colorful banners, balloons, and handmade signs proclaiming messages of unity and justice. The celebration brought out nearly every resident, from the eldest townsfolk to the youngest children, all dressed in Meadowville's colors of green and gold. Food stalls lined the square, the scent of barbecue and freshly baked pastries wafting through the air. A stage had been set up in the center, where local musicians performed, and a large screen displayed images from the past year, snapshots of committee meetings, community events, and even a few candid shots of Marie herself, smiling and working alongside her people. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the square, Marie took the stage. The crowd fell silent, their faces turned up toward her with anticipation. She looked out over them, feeling a wave of gratitude and pride that brought tears to her eyes. "Meadowville," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "We did this. Together. This past year, we have faced difficult truths, and we've had conversations that were long overdue. But because of you, because of your courage, your commitment, and your love for this town, we have created something beautiful." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers and claps filling the evening air. Marie waited for the noise to die down, her smile radiant as she continued. "This journey isn't over," she said. "There will be more challenges, more hard conversations, and more work to be done. But I believe in us. I believe in the people of Meadowville and in the future we are building together." She gestured toward the screen, where an image of Lena Moore holding her baby appeared, followed by a photo of Jamal, Lena's Youth Advisory Council, and Officer Daniels volunteering at a community event. Each face represented a piece of Meadowville's journey, a symbol of the unity they had forged. This celebration isn't just about the changes we've made. It's about the people who made them possible. It's about every one of you who stepped up, who raised your voice, and who believed in a better Meadowville. The crowd clapped and cheered, some wiping away tears, others nodding in agreement. As Marie looked out over them, she saw Grace, Lena, Jamal, and Officer Daniels standing together, each of them representing a part of the journey that had brought them to this moment. As the evening drew to a close, Marie stepped down from the stage, mingling with her townspeople. She listened to their stories, shared laughter and hugs, and felt the undeniable strength of the community that had rallied around her in her time of need. Meadowville had become more than just a town. It was a family, bound together by shared trials and triumphs. When the last of the festivities came to an end, and the sun had set fully over the town, Marie walked through the quiet streets, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. The flicker of streetlights cast a soft glow over the sidewalks, illuminating the pathway she had walked countless times before. This was her home, and it was stronger, fairer, and more united than it had ever been. She knew the journey would continue, that each day would bring new challenges and new victories. But as she walked through the heart of Meadowville, she felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that her town, the town she had devoted her life to, had found its way. And in the quiet of the night, with the echoes of the celebration still lingering in the air, Meadowville stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to what a community could achieve when it embraced justice, empathy, and love. For Marie, and for all of Meadowville, a new dawn had begun.